Don't want to make this too much more confusing. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. It's I have been working on this issue, especially Buy American, not as long as the chairman has, but I think that the fact that the Chinese government has made very clear in their plan for their Made in China 2025 initiative that they want to, the rail manufacturing sector is a top target. I think that should concern us on top of what the ranking member of the rail subcommittee, Mr. Crawford, pointed out, that tweet by CRRC, conquering the remaining 17% of all rail in the world is, we really need to wake up. We need to understand what a threat this is and do something about it. We can't just sit here and talk about it, and then years from now, when it happens, say, well, I remember talking about that, but, well, it happened. My first question, Mr. Galloway, in Australia, talked about how the freight rail car manufacturing industry was eliminated. How long potentially how quickly could that happen here in the U.S.? I know we have a much more robust domestic market than Australia had, but how quickly could you see this happen?
I think a lot of that would depend on the level of investment that CRRC or other state-owned enterprises would be making here in the U.S. In terms of either establishing final assembly facilities, specifically in freight rail, which is where I think a lot of that actually depends on the level of focus and investment that CRRC would be looking to make to disrupt specifically freight rail, which was the example that I was pointing to in Australia. I think it could occur in less than 10 years if the conditions are right. In Australia, the conditions were right. Australia recognized China as a market economy, granted the market economy status that opened a lot of doors for a company like CRRC to enter into that market and utilize their tactics to displace the market within freight rail. There was a lot of other kind of global macroeconomic conditions that were taking place. The Australia dollar was very, very strong during that period, and so that made the purchase of foreign rail cars much cheaper, and so they were able to acquire CRRC cars at a much lower price. And on top of that, Australia was engaged in a trade deal, the Chinese-Australian Free Trade Agreement during that period, which also opened up a lot of those doors for a lot of disruption within the marketplace. I think there are some corollaries that are here in the U.S. and some of those specific instances that could ultimately open up those doors for that type of disruption here in the U.S. And it could span in that same period of time in terms of our own disruption.
What levers do you suggest that we use in order to prevent that from happening here in the U.S.?
Well, I think right now there's one lever that's being utilized through the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs that help to mitigate some of those price advantages. However, we're looking at a short-term solution to a long-term problem, and the long-term problem is you have a company that's owned by a foreign government that is supporting that company, and ultimately the levers that need to get pulled is a long-term solution to move state-owned enterprises, wean them off of government subsidies and concessionary financing and the tactics that they're using to disrupt the U.S. economy and manufacturing.
Mr. Paul, do you have any suggestions on what levers that we can use?
I do. First, a robust spend. As the chairman indicated, the federal government hasn't always been a good partner. So if there's a stable, long-term market, there'll be more entrants into it. The second is that CRRC is predatory, and we have to understand that they now dominate the world rail market after being a bit player 20 years ago. And the same thing that's happening globally will happen in the United States as they drive competition out. An incumbent railmaker left Philadelphia after it lost its contract there, and we can assume that's going to happen down the road. So the TIVS legislation is a start. We should also insist on reciprocity. There is no American company that has the same opportunities that CRRC or BYD have in the United States. We don't have those opportunities in China. China's not a signatory to the government procurement agreement. It can discriminate, and it does, against our products. And so we should ensure that we have that reciprocity as well.
Thank you. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Let's